Hey everyone, welcome to Island Time TV. It is good to be back. We went through some changes. The world changed. COVID happened. Everything was on lockdown, but we're back and we got some new ideas and some new programming. And I'm very happy to have Scott Dawson back with us, fresh from his wonderful television performance on the Science Channel. And if you don't know what channel that's on, that's okay. Neither does anyone else. But it's out there, and if you got cable, uh, try to watch it. And if not, well, you find some other way to watch it. But we got Scott here to talk about some of his new finds and new information on his lifelong work with the Croatoan tribe, which includes the colony and the lost colony, the abandoned colony, whatever you want to call it. And we're here to talk about that. So, Scott, jump in whenever you want.
Yeah, yeah, man. I felt like the show was pretty good. It is TV, so they're not going to get everything that you want in there. But I feel like it was really positive, and some beautiful drone shots in there that they got from Brett Barley. And there's a lot of people that helped put this together, and I felt like overall it was a positive show.
Yeah, I thought the show really was beautiful. The island looked beautiful. They got some really nice days to shoot on, which you're just lucky if that happens. Sometimes the sky's like totally gray and washed out, but other times it's this beautiful shade of blue that just illuminates everything. And they had some nice days to shoot. And
Yeah, we were very lucky because we actually filmed all of that in December. But if you remember, last December was exceptionally warm. And we went out on a charter boat one day, and I had a T-shirt on, and there were like dolphin jumping. I kind of played it off like, yeah, it's just like this all the time.
yeah, it looked like a fun adventure you and Mark were. I'm sure a lot of people watched the program and said, "Hey, you know what? Let's check this place out. This place looks beautiful. There's stuff to do, and if you're into history."
Yeah, I mean, Hatteras Island is beautiful, but we were lucky that it wasn't blown out and windy or like the nor'easter we just had, where houses are falling into the ocean. So
yeah, well,
yeah,
that is
everything worked out.
everything changes. Everything changes on the shoreline. But
Yeah.
what else has changed is that there was some new information in the program and some new finds. The button, I guess, is the small piece of copper, I guess, were the choice.
Yeah, the Tudor Rose was probably the most important find, and they focused on that a lot, and they focused on two or three things we'd found in the past. And of course, they can't put everything that we found in there. And I guess like one of the most significant things that we found that wasn't mentioned on the show at all was a Saker cannonball. And the reason that it didn't make the air is because when you get iron that's 430 years old, it's really kind of chia petted out with rust from all the oxidation, and you have to do this process called electrolysis, where you remove the rust. You can't go in there with sandpaper, as you'll ruin the artifact. So you got to do electrolysis, and it's very slow. It takes a full day just to do one iron object, and we found thousands. So I had to kind of pick the stuff that I thought might end up being something and get electrolysis done on that first. And we brought the cannonball back the very last day they were filming. And, a lot of the analysis, and you can't go on television and say, this is a Saker cannonball if you don't know that for sure. And we didn't know for sure until after they were done filming. They saw it. I mean, we were finished with the electrolysis before they left, but there's a lot more analysis that goes into it than that before you know for sure what it is. And then there's a lot of things that we found going through the residue, which is a really, really small finds that happened after the show was done filming. So that's what I was going to try to do today with Island TV, is kind of go through some of the things that we found that didn't make the air. Starting with that, one of the myths of the Lost Colony is they talk about how when the governor, John White, came back with resupplies, that he didn't find anything except for the word Croatoan carved onto a palisade, and all the houses were gone and there was nothing there. And that's an exaggeration, because he did find some things left behind by the colony. And what he found were a lot of really heavy iron objects. He talks about iron fowler and pig iron. It's kind of like the raw iron bars that blacksmiths will turn into anything from door hinges to nails. Some of that was left behind. And he found saker shot. And saker shot is cannonballs that go to a saker cannon. And a saker cannon, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the smallest and 10 being the biggest, is about a 4. It's like a medium small cannon, but extremely accurate for the 16th century. They're invented by Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth's father. And we found one in the Croatoan Indian village, which makes no sense. Like, what are they doing with it, with saker shot? So obviously, it comes from the colony. When you put together that there's also a Tudor rose in there and Nuremberg token and all the other stuff, we found a lot of less sexy items, just little bits of redware and borderware and nails and all of that. And they're not going to spend a lot of time on television talking about that stuff, but it all adds up and tells the story. And there's a lot of things that we found on past digs that they did film, and they had Professor Horton talking about that just didn't make the air because I get it. They have to pick like what they feel is the most pertinent, and that's what they focus on. So they focused on the Tudor rose and a couple other things, and I get it. It's fine.
The big ticket items, we'll call them.
Yeah, the big ticket items, but the cannonball is, in my opinion, a big ticket item. Unfortunately, we didn't get the electrolysis and all the analysis done fast enough because they were only there for 2 weeks. And you got to remember that a lot of these film crews and a lot of the people involved are from different countries, and they're a lot more strict about COVID than we are at the moment. And so that's part of why we had such a time constraint. And, we had to limit how many people could be back there, and we had to get our temperature checked every morning. And so that's time you would normally spend doing science and digging and working that you have to spend waiting in line to fill out forms and do medical stuff. So anyway, the Saker cannonball is a big deal. And, the other big thing that we found that wasn't on there was daub, like DAUB, which is the clay sand mixture that the colonists made the walls of their houses out of. And that shouldn't be in a Native American village either. And that's really important because that in no way is a trade item from anywhere. That's worthless. It's just a chunk of clay, which they already have clay. Look at all the pipes and pottery the Indians are making. So this daub is also evidence of a structure, the house being there. And it was found near window glass, which I think they did mention the window glass, but they didn't really explain it. And, so we're finding these Elizabethan houses right next to the post holes and things of where longhouses were. Was it Hawkins, which is the word for longhouse, Algonquin. And, so they're, I'm not complaining, but I think the show was awesome. I just make that clear. But there was a lot of things that we found that didn't make it. So that's kind of the purpose of today, go through some of that stuff.
When you and Dr. Horton are on these digs and you've reached a certain layer in the stratigraphy, you operate under the assumption that anything that's metal is not from the Croatoan tribe, but from, and in this case, we're speculating from over the Atlantic. Is that correct?
Well, we know that for a fact.
You know that for a fact. That's indisputable.
Native Americans from Florida to Maine did not have iron at all. What can we sort of list down as indisputable facts
if and we'll start with that one. That anything metal is not from here. Here meaning
Well, except for copper, because the natives
copper.
did have a little bit of copper.
Mhm.
However, we have this machine called an XRF machine, and it was invented by a man named Bruce Kaiser, Dr. Kaiser, who's been to our digs before. And he got the idea from Star Trek, but it looks like this giant price gun, and you can put anything underneath it and zap it. And it sends out a laser basically that bounces off the object and comes back into this fancy machine, and it's hooked up to a laptop, and it gives you the elemental makeup of whatever it is. And with that machine, you can tell the difference between copper that came from Europe versus copper from the United States because the isotopes are different. So the only metal that the natives had was copper, but even that, thanks to Dr. Kaiser, we can figure out if it was copper from here or copper that came from overseas.
Now, when you're at this level of, I mean, it's like 440 years, right?
Right.
What what is left? Like, what can you
all
realistically
the wood is gone,
find?
right? Anything that is made out of carbon is gone. Most of the leather is gone, or it's thinner than a sheet of paper, and you know that makes sense because it's been underground for 440 years. But the but the metal items, especially things like bronze, brass, copper, they look 5 days old because it doesn't decompose the way that wood does. And so when we're not going to find clothing from the colony, for example, we're not going to find clothing from the Croatoan either because it's mostly deer skins. But what you do find are the buttons, the belt buckles, the hook and eye closures, which is this thing that they had on doublets. We found some of those. So the metal is going to last a lot longer.
And
Anything that's ceramic lasts a long time. So all of the different plates and pots and bowls and cups, that stuff's there. The clay is there, so the pipes and that kind of thing lasts much, much, much longer. Glass doesn't change much. It kind of changes color, but it's still there. And you can use the XRF machine on the glass too and figure out where it was fired, where it was made in the world.
wow.
Yeah.
And like, how helpful have smoking pipes been in your research? Like, if there had been no pipes, how much more difficult would that have made your job had people not taken up smoking?
It actually would have made it a lot harder because you got certain items that have a really long period where they're made the exact same way. For example, borderware, which is type of pottery, made the same way in the 1500s as it is in the 1600s. So you kind of got to go by what layer it's in to know how old that borderware is. But with pipes and of course with coins, which sometimes have dates on them, there's certain items that the typology of. Glass bottles are excellent, especially if you get a full base, not some little chip of glass, but if you get a full base of like an onion jar, or a lot of these things have a typology where they're only made this way for a 10-year period. For example, if you found a clear Pepsi bottle, right? I don't remember what year that was, 91 or whatever, but it wasn't around for very long. And so if you find something like that, you kind of know when it was made. If you're getting an 8-track or a Sony Walkman, or you know what I mean? So there's things that get replaced and they don't use them anymore. So the pipes actually make it really easy to date layers. And when you get to the 16th century, one of the things you're looking for is to not find certain items. For example, in the 1650 layer, there's a lot of everything: lead shot, glass, you name it, it's all there. Weapons, tools, all that stuff. And one of the things that you find constantly in the native villages are these tiny little glass beads that come from Venice, and they were brought over by the English as trade beads because the English realized they could trade these little glass beads and get basically anything. And it's a worthless item, and in Europe it's not worth anything. So they brought bags of them over, and Jamestown did the same thing. And in the 1650 layer, there's thousands of them. And all of a sudden, when you get to the 1500s, there's none because they hadn't learned about that yet. And there are a few glass beads in the 1500s, but they're completely different from the ones from the 1600s. They're a lot bigger. They're a different shape. There's far fewer of them. In the 1650 layer, you get a lot of those tidewater pipe bowls that have all the cool animals carved on them, and we know what they look like. They find them in Jamestown. They find them in Plymouth. We know what they are. And when you get to the 1500 layer, they're gone because they haven't been invented yet. So you're kind of getting free of these beads and free of these pipes, and that helps you know that you're getting to a new layer. And the Native American stuff changes as well because their lives were impacted and changed tremendously after contact with Europeans. For example, arrowheads. As soon as they get guns, you don't find arrowheads anymore. They're gone. Spearheads, same thing. They completely replaced it with firearms. And that was surprising to me because I thought, well, they probably used both for a while. It doesn't look like it. They went with the lead shot, and their diet changes as soon as they get shotguns. They're a lot more deer, a lot more birds, and they're still eating fish. They're still eating the same types of things, but in different amounts, if that makes sense.
And they showed on the program that there were some teeth.
Yeah.
And so teeth and bones will last. You could
teeth and bones. Teeth will last a really, really long time because of the enamel. And giant deer bones, horse bones, and cattle, they last a really long time. A lot of the smaller bones that are in fish and birds do not last, but you'll get, for example, with a red drum, the vertebrae is quite large, and so that will last. And the teeth from a sheep's head last a long time. So you get, if you get a sheep's head tooth, you know it's a sheep's head because their teeth look like ours. They look like front teeth of a person. And that, fortunately, that stuff does last a long time. So you know, okay, they were eating this type of fish and that type of fish, even if you don't have the whole skeleton of that fish. All you need is kind of some of it to know what kind of fish it is. And so bone lasts a long time if it's a large bone and a dense bone. So the bird bones don't last very long. But if it's from a duck or some geese or something that's a little bigger, then you do, some of those bird bones last, but you're not going to find like a sparrow, you know, it's just too thin and hollow and it doesn't last long enough.
And so what evidence, real primary evidence of assimilation are you combining the physical evidence?
I think the best evidence of assimilation, I mean, it's easy to know the colony went to Croatoans. They wrote it down, and all you need to know is like the real history, and there you already know that that's what happened. But for assimilation, to show that, yes, they did intermarry and they lived together for a long time versus they just went to Croatoan and died in 5 years, you know, is one, you've got what John Lawson found where the natives told him that. But in the archaeology, you can see it because all of these items that they got in the 1500s get repurposed and hung on to for a long, long time. I'll give you a couple examples. This is one that I thought was really, really cool. There are these iron handles, and they went to these big chests, right? Like imagine a handle that you and I could grab at the same time, like that big, about 10 inches long, big iron handles that when people traveled on ships, everything was packed in these giant chests and barrels because that's the easiest way to do it. And the hoops from the barrels, the metal part lasts a long time. And of course, the wooden chest and the wooden parts of the barrel are gone, but you get the hoops and you get the handles. And there's a lot of those. And all of them have been repurposed. Like every single time that we find one of these giant chest handles, you know, one's a hook, one's been made into an awl, one's been made into a drill. This one is that, this one is this. And it's neat. Because you can see like one side of the handle they left alone. It has this big fleur-de-lis pattern on it, you know, like on the New Orleans Saints helmet. And then the other side's been whacked off and they've turned it into whatever. They're all different. And that's just kind of neat to see how all of these items were repurposed into something more pragmatic and useful. I'll give you another example. We find glass arrowheads, and the glass, which we used an XRF machine on to see what kind of glass it was. You can look at the different levels of lead and potassium and all that's in it. And then they have that all in a data bank, and they can figure out where in the world it was made, which is amazing. And we found these really pretentious, expensive plates that were glass that had been shattered and turned into arrowheads. And that just shows that, at some point, that pretentious, fancy plate that some gentleman brought over was a lot more useful as arrowhead than to plate to eat on. And so you can see where the colony is trying to survive, and they're taking their earrings and they've been bent into the shape of a fishhook. And that stuff's cool to me, just seeing all that. And the big kicker, though, is that the longhouses and the English houses are in the same place. In my mind, when I read the sources, I always imagined that they had a survivors camp, which we'll get to. And then as that broke down, they just sort of, out of hunger or whatever, moved in with the natives to survive. But it looks like they're actually living side by side, or at least there's a few English houses back there. And they built a forge, and you can see where they were smelting copper. We have this copper bun that was smelted. It's different than melting. It's 2 inches thick, shape of a football. And we found a fire bar, which is a huge piece of iron that was used in the process of working copper, right next to it. So we could see the ground that was burned, and the whole thing is like, wow, this is where they were actually working. It was a little coppersmith shop, which is like a blacksmith shop that works with copper instead of iron. And the with the guild system that the English had, you had different people that specialized. So you had this guy works with this metal, these guys work with that metal. They didn't cross train so much. So we could see this is where they're building and working with copper, which they do have a supply of in the United States as well. So they could continue to use that one. And it was so valuable to the natives, it was like gold over here, that technology is actually extremely useful, because now they have the ability to get all this copper dust that they're getting out of rivers and melt it down into something big and make ornaments or whatever. One of the things that was found on Sir Walter Raleigh when he was beheaded, King James killed him, that in his clothing they found what's called a golden crescent. And it's not gold, it's copper. And it's shaped like, imagine the macaroni and cheese, like that curved hollow tube, and then cut that in half long ways. And then they would stick it on the top of their ear as an ear cuff. And guess who else had one? Manio. So that's kind of neat that Raleigh had the same kind of jewelry that Manio was wearing. And we found some of those. And that's just neat. Anytime that you're reading about something for 20 years like that, and then you see it and it comes out of the ground, and it's like, oh, I know what that is. I don't have to ask on this one. Because Mark is the guy who knows everything. Every now and then something comes up that I know. So it's like being in a class in school that you're not very good at that subject, and then they ask a question that you happen to know that one, But yeah, man, the whole thing is just such a cool experience, because the whole colony aside, whatever, we're salvaging all this Native American history before it's under some Easter egg colored house. And that alone is enough reason to do it.
And what about DNA evidence? Is that pertinent at all? Like your grandmother's on the show and her ancestry traces back. Is DNA evidence at all helpful, or is it's just too much time?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of variables with DNA. So, like my sis, I didn't bother to do it, but my sister did. She got a DNA test, and it came back 20% Native American, which was a lot more than I thought, but that's neither here nor there because you can't really prove that that's Croatoan because it could be some other Native American. My dad has a little bit from Virginia, and it doesn't, when you get a DNA test and it says Native American, it doesn't say Cherokee or Choctaw or whatever. They don't, they're not that advanced yet with it.
That's
so it doesn't really tell you a whole lot other than.
It tells me something, I mean.
Yeah. It's pretty obvious that it's from the Croatoan tribe, at least in this case, but you can't prove it, to some Debbie Dowder.
Right. And with something like this, like there's not going to be any photographic evidence. So it's just a lot of little things that collectively.
There is in my family. We have a tin plate of one of our ancestors. It's a Native American woman, and she's hanging a seam net. Because people got to remember, like, it's not like the Croatoan / Hatteras tribe vanished in 1587 as well. They continued to live on the island for centuries, and they're gone now. But they lasted, into the photograph era.
But are there records? Are there birth records, marriage certificates, death certificates, anything of that? There are, okay.
So that's not very many.
But that is hard evidence, though. Yeah. Even just one.
The Hatteras tribe has a land grant that dates to 1759 of 200 acres that they were, I don't say given, I say allowed to keep, because it was all their land at one point. And they give the head of household of all of the people that are on this land grant, and it's all the last names you see in the phone book today. And so there's that. And I try to stay away from the DNA stuff because I do not care where the Lost Colony descendants are. Just like if I was doing a report on Thomas Jefferson, I wouldn't look for his 6th great grandson, as it's not really relevant. It's just more about the history and what happened in the 1500s and what we're finding in the layer from the 1500s and trying to tell that story. And, I guess like other people are very interested in where their descendants are, but it doesn't really matter. Like, for example, if I was one, so is my twin brother. He lives in Japan. That doesn't mean the colony went to Japan, So it really doesn't have any bearing. Like where their descendants live today doesn't tell you anything. I mean, not in a concrete way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that it basically could have gone one of two ways, which is they could have all been killed or just died out, or they could have assimilated. If there is a third option, let me know what that is. And I don't think it's possible that all of them died because there are always survivors, So
they assimilated. A key thing to remember is there was only 16 women, white women, right? So that's going to speed up assimilation.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like when you've only got 16 white women, so there's 16 white dudes. Let's say all of the white women married white men. Just even if that happened, that's only, 16 families out of 117 people. So the rest of them are all men, and they either don't pass their seed on at all, or they pass it on with a native.
Right. Biology being what it is.
Right. Sailors have never been picky. There's a lot of love on that island.
We can figure out what happened.
And then the next recorded history after John White of anyone going into Hatteras that survived is John Lawson, who found blue-eyed Indians wearing English clothes, who told him their ancestors were white people who could speak out of a book, blah, blah, blah. Folks got to understand that this whole idea of a lost colony was created in the 1930s with the play, where they made a lost Croatoan as well, because that's when they started teaching in school that no one knows what this word means. It was left behind by the colony. We don't know it was a body of water, and that's just a lie.
Right.
Because the Croatoan are mentioned throughout the sources. They give the latitude of the inlets. They show it it's clearly labeled on the map. And the other thing that wasn't on the Science Channel that, well, if you really paid attention, it was, but it wasn't made clear, is that the English lived on Hatteras Island before the Lost Colony. They had a group, the very first one landed at Hatteras in 1584. That's your original Plymouth Rock right there. The first time English feet set foot in America was in Buxton on July 4th in 1584. And they lived there for 6 weeks. And then they went home because it was not meant to last. It was a recon mission. And that's when they met Manio and all that stuff. The next year in 1585, they came back with more people, and some of them lived on Hatteras Island as well, under direction of a guy named Edward Stafford. And Edward Stafford and his group living at Hatteras are the ones that spotted Francis Drake, who rescued them all, and after a year, and then they went back to England, right? So then when the colony comes in, they only stopped by Roanoke to pick up 15 guys that had been left there by the third voyage. The third voyage was supposed to resupply the second voyage, who had already left with Drake, but they didn't know that. It's not like they had cell phones, so they get killed by Secotan Indians from Mans Harbor. And then when the colony comes in, the fourth voyage, one of them is murdered by the Secotan as well. His name was George Howe, who shot 16 times arrows, had his head bashed in, and nobody saw it, but like, you don't need to be a CSI detective to know that's murder. And when George Howe is killed, who do they turn to for help? The Croatoan. They send 20 guys down to Croatoan to find out what happened, who killed George Howe, who attacked these other guys, what's going on. And the Croatoan host them to a feast and welcome them back. And they said, we'll go talk to the Secotan for you. But the Croatoan also hated the Secotan. So instead, what they did is they went over to Mans Harbor and smashed them and stole all of their corn and pumpkins and gave it to the English. So that's important because it shows that before John White left, the Lost Colony was in contact with the Croatoan already, immediately, before he even left. And he was only here a few weeks. It shows that they had lived on Croatoan before in 1584. They lived there again in 85. In 87, they visited there and spent one night there and got help and what have you. The chief, Minatonan, was there when Virginia Dare was born and Manio was baptized. So when the governor came back and sees this message, it's not like a random choice to go to Hatteras. It's not like, well, it sticks out far and they can spot ships from there. Maybe that's why. Well, yeah, but they also had a relationship. Mm-hmm. That's important. They had a relationship with that tribe. They did mention Manio is from there. Now, I think that's important too. But knowing that the English had lived there, for months at a time for 3 years before the colony, that adds a lot of weight to that argument. And every show I've ever done glosses over that. It's kind of irritating, but I think that's an important thing to understand the relationship between that tribe and the English. And conversely, the relationship between the English and the next tribe over on the mainland, which was horrible. The English murdered their chief and burned down a village and kidnapped children. And you don't hear about any of that either. But that's the historical context. It's not like you just pull out a map of Virginia and North Carolina and look at it and go, where would I go? You got to understand the situation they're walking into. They're not welcome in certain places. And in other places, they get along great. So that's an important thing to know when you look into this problem.
And they also didn't have Google Maps or any map.
Yeah, they didn't have anything,
This was all
man.
undiscovered, uncharted territory, and you really have to admire the bravery and the skill of those people. What life
and
must
you have
have
to
been
admire
like.
the love and the charity that the Croatoan showed to feed an extra 100 people during a drought.
It's
but they benefited too because they're getting all these European technologies and they're getting help against their enemies, the Secotan, who they hated, and they're getting weapons and what have you.
All good relationships are mutually beneficial. And they potentially could have had a very mutually beneficial relationship, but as is often the case, greed gets in the way, suspicion gets in the way. And
that's what happened pretty much in the second voyage is Ralph Lane, who was in charge of that one, was an asshole and bit off more than he could chew, and that's why the Secotan started killing them. It wasn't that these are savage people. They got along with the English in the first voyage. Croatoan and Secotan got along. It's like a honeymoon period where everybody's happy. and that went down the drain pretty quick the second time. And then the third voyage, of course, paid for the sins of the second voyage. Then the fourth voyage came, and one of them got killed because of that. Blah blah blah. So yeah, it makes sense to go to Croatoan. Everyone else in the area wanted to kill them, and did kill some of them. So it's a no-brainer. But to find actual like evidence of that, like, okay, well, if you dig on a Croatoan Indian village, what are you going to find? It's like, well, we've got a Tudor rose and a Nuremberg token and this and this and this and this. And it's just people got to understand we've been digging 10 years, but we only get 1 week, 2 weeks a year dig. Mm-hmm. And the first 10 days of those 2 weeks, you're going through the other layers. Right. Because we don't just plow down to the 1500s because all of it's important, So we're salvaging, we go through the Civil War and everything else. And, so you really only get like a couple of days a year at that layer. And you're talking about a pit that is no bigger than a one-fourth the size of a tennis court at the most. And we've got all of this from that tiny area. You know what I mean? That's good evidence to me. Given everything together, I think we have a pretty solid case. And what we don't know is, was it all of the colonists or was it just some of them? How long were they on Roanoke before they decided to leave and go to Croatoan? Had 10, 20 of them died already up on Roanoke before they left? We don't know. What we do have solid evidence of is damn sure some of them are right here because you can see it. So we may never be able to solve it forever. Like, yes, they all came right here. Can't say that yet. But for sure, bulk of them did, if not all of them.
And there's certainly some evidence to say that some of them stayed here and just never left.
Yeah, they just stayed there and never left. All these wacky theories that were put out like, well, the Croatoan only lived there seasonally. That's a lie. I don't know who came up with that or what evidence they have for that, because you can see clearly that they're living there year round. You have all the shellfish from all the seasons. And again, they didn't disappear in the 1500s. The Hatteras tribe still living there, 1600s, 1700s, a few of them into the 1800s, and they were there year round. There's no reason not to be there year round. Then you have this other idea put forward that nothing grows there, so it wouldn't have been able to support them. That's a lie. It's alluvial soil, the same as the Nile River Valley. You can grow whatever you want. My own family has been there at least 350 years, and they didn't eat sand. So all of the kind of misinformation that's been put out over the years, it's all coming from Roanoke Island.
And also there was this concept of a survivor camp. I had never heard this term before from you.
Yeah,
is this
that wasn't explained very well at all.
Mm-hmm. Is this
because there's a lot of reasons. Like one of the drones broke. Like there was a lot of just logistic stuff that happened. But here's what they're trying to do is okay. So there's 5 Nuremberg tokens that have been found. The very first one that was found in the 1930s in Frisco on Hatteras Island by my 4th grade teacher's dad. And okay, so that one was the only one. And then in the 50s, when they were building Fort Raleigh, like that, the earthworks that are up in Manio at Fort Raleigh, they're not 400 years old. They built them with a backhoe in 1952. And then people stand there and reference like, oh, wow, look at this. But it's from the 50s. And when they were doing that, they accidentally found 3 Nuremberg tokens up there. 2 of the Nurembergs that they found on Roanoke were identical to the one that was found in the 30s on Hatteras Island. So that was kind of a connection. But because they didn't do it through archaeology and they did it with a tractor or whatever, you don't know what layer it was in. There's no stratigraphy. And the one found in Hatteras, same thing. Like they're all found on accident. So we found one in Buxton that matched the other one from Roanoke. So it's like Roanoke got a nickel and 2 dimes and Hatteras got a nickel and a dime. Mm-hmm. It's like one matches 2 and the other one matches the other one. So there's pretty strong evidence, like the connection between the 2 islands. They started there and they came over here. But here's the thing that I really wish had made the film, and it was in the short. They changed it. I don't know why. All of the Nuremberg tokens had holes drilled in them because anything copper or whatever, they're actually a mixture of copper and zinc. They are valuable to the natives. Like gold was like bling, or copper was like gold. So they have holes drilled in them as they're wearing them as necklaces, except for one. The first one that was found, the one that was found in Frisco, did not have any holes in it and was not in an Indian village. It was like the only part of the island that didn't have Indians. Kind of that crappy part, that narrow part between Hatteras and Frisco. They didn't really use that. So that's where the survivors camp probably was, because that Nuremberg, had any native ever come across it, they had to poke a hole in it for it. And it's the only one that didn't have that. And it's the only one that wasn't found in a native context. Like all of the Tudor Rose, everything we got is in a Native American site after assimilation. Where they were for the brief period before that, probably Frisco, because that's where that token came from. There's also a silver coin from the 1500s found over there by some guy metal detecting, which I encourage people not to do, because when you do that, you ruin the record. But nevertheless, there's that. And a few other things when they're building houses and stuff that, you know, it looks like the survivors camp was in Frisco. It was not at the golf course.
If there was a quote-unquote survivors camp, do you think that turned into a death camp?
No,
were they barricading themselves
I think
in for protection?
They don't know they're lost, so it's not like they know that they've been abandoned. They're not going to assimilate day one. As far as they know, they are going to be resupplied. There's a language barrier. There's a religious barrier. So they're waiting on ships, and eventually, you get hungry or whatever. You do what you got to do to live, so they assimilate with the Croatoan. But before that, that survivors camp probably went through a period where it was becoming everyone's dying camp. So then they went native.
They were waiting for supplies that never came.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
And
it's hard to wrap your mind around.
I would tell you, I know where the survivors camp was, but we're gonna go quietly dig it up, and without cameras, because it just makes it so much harder to get any work done. And when we find something really cool over there, then we'll bring the cameras in. But it's near where we said, but it's not there.
And so what else you got planned in the future? I guess you're going to continue with this work?
We're trying to get a freestanding building to house all of the artifacts and open our own museum on the island.
That would be so cool. That would really be awesome.
To house all the Croatoan stuff and the English that they adopted. And there's plans in the works for all of that. And that's kind of what I'm focused on. And we still have buckets and buckets of residue to go through. That always happens after a dig, where you kind of comb through a second time and get all the really small pieces of lead shot and this and that out. But every single year, something miraculous is found in the residue every year. So probably this will be the same. And just waiting for the wind to die down, a little warmer weather, because you have to do it outside. And we'll go through that and see what else pops up.
Well, I think that would be really great. And if a museum came out of this, because all of this information and all of these artifacts need to be preserved.
They are preserved, and we've got
but beyond your
storage, we do have like a little bit on display in the Hatteras Library, and whatever. It's not. It deserves better than that. Not to insult them, but they know that
we love them, and
they're just trying to help us, and I'm glad that they are. But it needs its own building, and that's what we're going to get.
That would really be great, and I really hope that happens. And
it will. We'll make it happen. It's one of those things, like if you just keep at it, then it will happen.
Yeah.
You can't wait around and just say, I hope somebody does that. There's an old Cherokee saying, it says, if you see something that needs to be done, maybe you're the one that ought to do it. I don't know how many times I've said that to myself doing this stuff, because Yeah, I wish somebody else would do it, but they're not. So I will.
Well, this is your calling, and it's turned into your legacy, and
It seems like it. I mean, in the beginning, I just wanted to. I had like a jewelry case full of stuff, and I was just hoping to salvage enough to put together like one clay pot, and then it turned into an international dig with multiple countries, and we've been on the Travel Channel, History Channel, Science Channel, Discovery Channel, National Geographic Magazine. I was in New York Times. Blah 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 blah. It's weird, you know.
it's got to feel a little weird for you, but it's also got to feel great for you. How it's something you just started doing on your own. Yeah.
It doesn't feel like what I would have thought it would feel like if you told me that 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it mostly just is strange, you know. Watching myself on television, and I was like, oh, I remember that day. That's when this guy hurt his leg, and like I'm just thinking all these other things that I don't know. Yeah, we're gonna keep at it and just keep doing this, and I think that's just gonna continue to grow, and a lot of people on that island have been very supportive, and as like a modern tribe, you know, I think we can make it happen and preserve everything and keep it on the island like it should be. So, yeah. Anything else?
I think we covered everything.
All right, cool.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Take care, bro. Bye.
Island time, when you're living on island time. Cause when the rain come due, when you got fishing to do, you on island time. On island time, when you're living on island time. So tell your mama to save all the drama, cause we're living on island time.